Well, to get things started here in Chapter 1, the first thing we want to do is take a look at how to do a standard edit of your video inside Adobe Premiere Pro. Now, I've already got the application open, so you should go ahead and open up Premiere Pro, and you should be sitting right at the same screen I am. Welcome to Premiere Pro, and what we need to do is either open up an old project that we've been working on or create a brand new project. So we're just going to click on New Project to get things started. And of course, we're going to need to fill out all the details about our project at this point. So let's take a look at the New Project screen. What we're primarily looking at the top is how do we want to edit the video. And to make your choices here, you're going to be looking at two things. The most important thing is where's your video going to go when you're finished with it. The second most important thing is what kind of video you're bringing in to edit with your project. And you want to consider these two when making your choice with the project settings. If you're just going to be making a video that's going to be used in a Flash project, your choices are easy because any one of these settings will work for you. In general, we're going to be editing our video bigger than we need it to be and reducing its size and compressing it when we make the FLV at the end. If you want to use your edited video for other purposes, you may want to be thinking about those other purposes when you're choosing these presets. For instance, if your project is going to go out DV and NTSC, which is the American Broadcasting Standard for television right now, you'd want to choose one of the DV NTSC settings. The standard settings are for our standard television screens, and of course, widescreen is going to cover our 16:9 screens. The differences we see on the kilohertz here is just for the sound files. You'll get a little better sound quality on a 48 kilohertz file, but of course your files will be a little bit bigger. Now, as I mentioned before, if we're just creating an FLV file, we can use any one of these settings because they're all much bigger than what we'll use for our Flash file at the end. So for this first project, I'm going to make the choice based on the video footage that we'll be bringing into the file. And I'm actually not going to use one of the standard presets because we're not going to be using DV footage. So I'm going to switch over to the Custom Settings tab over here. And this is where we can set up all the details ourselves. Now the first thing, in the editing mode up at the top, I'm going to choose the desktop mode. As you can see, the rest of the modes are set up for DV or HD, and since all the footage that we'll be using has already been dropped into QuickTime, we're just going to be setting desktop for that. The second thing we're concerned about is the time base, and this is basically the frame rate. Once again, I'm going to defer back to the footage that we'll be bringing into the file, which is all set at 29.97. That's the standard frame rate for NTSC, so I'm going to leave it at that setting. Now, even though that looks a little bit strange, we can have any kind of frame rate we want on our movies, regardless of the frame rate we use in our Flash files. I've only got a couple more things to set up. Our footage is set up at 640 by 480 instead of 720 by 480. This is a DV format, so I'm just going to change our frame size to 640, and we'll leave the vertical height at 480. And once again, that's just because the footage that we're going to be using is already set at 640 by 480, so it won't have to be interpolated. Now also we're going to be changing the pixel aspect ratio. In standard DV footage, you actually use rectangular shaped pixels, which is why we see that 0.9 here, and it's also why we can fit 720 pixels into the horizontal space of a standard screen. But for 640 by 480, I'm going to change that to square pixels, and that's normally what we're used to working with in a computer media environment. Now that's going to set up our project settings for this particular project. But just as a reminder, if you're starting with DV footage, leave all the settings at DV. That'll allow you to edit in DV and result in a DV file, and you can still take that same file and drop it down to a smaller version FLV file for use in your Flash project. You'll also end up with much higher quality results. The general rule of thumb is if you start with good-looking video, you'll end with good-looking video. Now I'm only going to change one more thing for our particular project, and that's the location of where we'll save our finished file. As you can see down in the location, the default is to put it somewhere in your user settings in an Adobe folder. And you can use that for any of your projects you'd like to. It'll keep all of your Adobe Premiere projects in one place. But just so we can find things for this particular series right now, I'm going to save our project into the chapter folder of our project files. So I'm just going to go over here to Browse real quick. You can see we start at the desktop, and your project files should be out there on the desktop. I'll just open the project file folder up, and we'll just designate Chapter 1 as the target folder. The last thing we need to do is give our project a name, and we're going to be creating an edit based on some Arctic footage. So I'm just going to call this Arctic Edit. It'll save all the appropriate file extensions onto it. So to finish this off, we can click OK. And we're off and running in our Premiere Pro project. Now before we go start adding a whole bunch of stuff to our project, I just wanted to go back to our Chapter 1 folder and show that we have actually set up a few things along with our new Premiere Pro project. I'm just going to Alt-Tab here on the PC, and of course you can Command-Tab if you're on the Mac, out to my Chapter 1 folder. Or you can just go out to the desktop and open the folder if you like. As you'll notice inside of our Chapter 1 folder, we've got a FLA file that we're going to be using a little bit later, but you can see our new Arctic Edit project that we created. And Premiere Pro is going to create these other 3 folders along with it each time you create a project. Now, you may not be needing these folders, but it's going to create them every time. And they're basically set up to store any of the items you'll need during the edit. The media cache files and the preview files are going to be used simply to store some renders that'll make previewing your project much easier and faster. And the encoded file folder is mainly for storing anything that you might capture, let's say directly from your camera, for use in this project. Since we're not going to be doing any of that inside of our little edit, we won't need these folders, but I'm just going to leave them there, and it's best to do so because each time you work with this project, Premiere is simply going to recreate them anyway. Now let me just Alt-Tab back into Premiere Pro, and we can go on with our edit project.